There is a kind of love that doesn't just give, it dissolves. For many parents, especially those who loved too deeply, love became a slow disappearance. It started with small sacrifices, skipping meals, missing sleep, postponing dreams. But over time, those sacrifices became identity. The parent stopped being a person and became a provider, a protector, a permanent emotional reservoir. They gave without pause, without boundaries, without asking for anything in return. And while the world praised them for being selfless, they quietly lost themselves. Their hobbies faded. Their friendships thinned. Their voice softened. And when they tried to speak up, to say they were tired, to ask for space, they were met with confusion, even guilt. You're the parent, they were told. You're supposed to give. But love without limits is not noble. It's dangerous. It teaches children that care is endless, that parents are invincible, and that emotional labor is free. And when the parent finally breaks, emotionally, physically, spiritually, no one understands why. Because they never saw the erosion. They only saw the giving. This chapter is a tribute to every parent who loved too much, who gave too much, and who forgot that love must include self-love too. They were the ones who said yes when they wanted to say no, who stayed awake when their body begged for rest, who gave money they didn't have, and who smiled through pain so their children wouldn't worry. They were the ones who stopped buying things for themselves, who stopped dreaming, who stopped asking for anything, because they believed that love meant putting themselves last. And while that belief may seem noble, it's actually heartbreaking. Because when you love without limits, you teach others that your limits don't matter. You teach them that your exhaustion is acceptable, that your silence is peace, and that your suffering is invisible. And over time, you become a ghost in your own life, present, but fading. You walk through rooms where no one asks how you are. You cook meals that no one thanks you for. You give advice that no one listens to. And you begin to wonder, do they love me, or just what I do for them? That question haunts you. It follows you into the night, into the quiet moments when you sit alone and remember who you used to be. You remember the books you wanted to write, the places you wanted to visit, the passions you once had. And you grieve, not for what you lost, but for what you gave up willingly, thinking it was love. But love is not self-destruction. Love is not silence. Love is not endless giving. Love is mutual. Love is respectful. Love is balanced. And if your love has turned into a one-way street, where you give and give and give, and receive nothing in return, then it's time to pause. It's time to ask yourself, what do I need? What do I deserve? What have I forgotten about myself? Because you are not just a parent. You are a person, a soul, a story. And your story matters. Your dreams matter. Your voice matters. This chapter is not just a reflection, it's a wake-up call. A reminder that loving others should never mean losing yourself. That giving should never mean disappearing. That parenting should never mean erasure. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to be seen. And if your children don't understand that, teach them. Not with anger, but with truth. Not with guilt, but with clarity. Because the greatest gift you can give your children is not endless sacrifice. It's the example of a parent who knows their worth. Who loves deeply but wisely. Who gives generously but with boundaries. Who shows that love is not slavery, it's strength. So today, reclaim your story. Reclaim your voice. Reclaim your limits. And remember, the love that forgets limits is not love, it's loss. And you deserve more than that. You deserve to be whole. There is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from physical labor. It comes from emotional surrender, from saying yes so many times that your soul forgets how to say no. For many parents, especially those who love too much, this chapter is their silent truth. It begins with small requests. Can you pick me up? Can I borrow some money? Can you watch the kids? And of course, the parent says yes, because love, they believe, means being available. But over time, those requests multiply. They grow louder, heavier, more frequent. And the parent, afraid of conflict, afraid of being seen as selfish, keeps saying yes. Even when they're exhausted. Even when they're emotionally drained. Even when their own needs are screaming for attention. They say yes with a smile, but inside, they're breaking. And when they finally gather the courage to say no, they're met with resistance, anger, guilt, manipulation. You don't care about me. You've changed. You're being unfair. And so, the parent retreats. They go back to saying yes. Not because they want to, but because they're afraid. Afraid of losing love. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of being labeled as difficult. But every yes chips away at their soul. Every yes becomes a wound. And by the time they realize what's happened, it's too late. They've built a life of compliance, not connection. They've taught their children that love means obedience, that care means silence, and that boundaries are betrayal. And the tragedy is not just in what they gave, it's in what they lost. Their voice, their peace, their right to choose. This chapter is a voice for every parent who said yes when they wanted to say no, and paid the price with their emotional health. It's a mirror for those who stayed up late helping with projects while their own work piled up. For those who gave money they couldn't afford, just to avoid guilt. For those who rearranged their lives to fit their children's needs, while their own needs went unmet. And it's a warning that love without boundaries is not love, it's fear dressed as devotion. You must teach your children that no is not rejection, it's self-respect. That saying, I can't, is not weakness, it's wisdom. And that your love is not measured by how much you give, but by how honestly you live. Because if you don't protect your limits, no one else will. And if you don't speak your truth, your silence will become your prison. This chapter is not just about exhaustion, it's about awakening. It's about reclaiming the right to pause, to rest, to choose. And it's about understanding that every time you say yes out of fear, you teach your children that your needs don't matter. So today, say no if you need to. Say not now if you're tired. Say, I need space if you're overwhelmed. And say it with love, with strength, with clarity. Because the parent who says yes until it hurts is not strong, they're suffering. And they deserve better. You deserve better. You deserve peace. There is a kind of loss that doesn't come with funerals or goodbyes. It comes quietly, slowly, and invisibly as a parent's identity fades beneath the weight of endless responsibility. Before they were parents, they were people, vibrant, curious, passionate individuals with dreams, hobbies, and a sense of self. They had favorite songs, favorite books, favorite places to wander. They had ambitions, quirks, and a voice that belonged to them alone. But somewhere along the way, that voice was drowned out by the needs of others. They became just mom or just dad, and the world stopped asking who they were beyond that role. This chapter explores the quiet tragedy of identity loss, the way parenting, when done without boundaries, can consume the very person doing it. It's not that they regret loving their children. It's that they forgot to love themselves too. They stopped dressing for joy and started dressing for function. They stopped pursuing passions and started pursuing errands. They stopped being seen as individuals and started being seen as support systems. And when they tried to reclaim those parts, to take a class, to go out, to travel, to write, to dance, they were met with confusion or resistance. Why now? Isn't that selfish? You should rest. And so, they stopped trying. They accepted the erasure. They became background characters in their own story. And when they looked in the mirror, they saw someone they didn't recognize, someone who had lived for others, but never for themselves. The tragedy is not just in what they gave, it's in what they forgot to keep. Their name became a role. Their life became a service. And their soul became silent. This chapter is a tribute to every parent who once painted, sang, traveled, studied, dreamed, and then gave it all up thinking that's what love required. It's a call to remember that parenting should not cost your identity, that you are allowed to be more than a caretaker, that your passions are not distractions, they are lifelines, and that your children need to see you as a whole person, not just a provider. Because when you disappear into your role, you teach them that love means losing yourself. And that lesson will echo into their own relationships, their own parenting, their own sense of self. So reclaim your name. Reclaim your joy. Reclaim your story. You are not just someone's parent. You are someone. And that someone deserves to be seen, heard, and celebrated, not just for what they give, but for who they are. There is a kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from betrayal. It comes from being invisible to the very people you gave everything to. For many parents, especially those who loved too much, this chapter is the most painful. It's not about what they gave, it's about how little was seen. They were there for every fever, every failure, every heartbreak. They stayed up late, worked extra hours, skipped meals, and postponed dreams, all to make sure their children had what they needed. And yet, as the years passed, the gratitude faded. The appreciation disappeared. The children began to take without noticing. They asked for money without asking how their parent was doing. They demanded time without checking if their parent was tired. They expected emotional support without offering any in return. And when the parent tried to speak, to say they felt unseen, unappreciated, unloved, they were met with defensiveness. You're being dramatic. You're always complaining. You're supposed to be there for me. And so, the parent went silent. They stopped asking for thanks. Stopped hoping for recognition. Stopped believing they mattered beyond their usefulness. And that silence became a wound, deep, quiet, and constant. It followed them into every room, every phone call, every family gathering. They smiled, they served, they showed up, but inside they felt like ghosts. Present but not felt. Needed but not cherished. And the tragedy is not just in the children's blindness, it's in the parents' acceptance of it. They told themselves, at least they call. At least they visit. At least they need me. But need is not love. And presence is not connection. This chapter is a mirror for every parent who has felt like a background character in their child's life, who has watched their sacrifices be forgotten, their emotions be dismissed, and their humanity be ignored. It's a call to children everywhere. See your parents. Not just as helpers, but as humans. Not just as givers, but as beings with needs, emotions, and limits. Ask them how they're doing. Thank them for what they've done. Listen when they speak. Because love is not just about receiving, it's about recognizing. And if you've taken without seeing, it's not too late to change. But if you don't, one day you'll look back and realize that the person who gave you everything was quietly breaking, and you never noticed. So today, notice. Appreciate. Because the parent who loved too much deserves more than silence. They deserve to be seen. There is a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being surrounded by people who only see your function, not your feelings. For many parents, especially those who gave too much for too long, this loneliness is the most brutal kind, because it's not the absence of company, it's the absence of emotional connection. They are in the room, they are at the table, they are in the group chat, but they are not felt, not asked how they are, not invited to share their thoughts, not embraced for who they are. They are only acknowledged when something is needed. Can you help with the kids? Can you transfer some money? Can you come early and cook? And they do it, because that's what they've always done, but inside, they are aching for someone to ask, how are you really? Aching for someone to say, you matter to me even when you're not helping, aching for someone to see them as a soul, not a service. They gave everything, their time, their energy, their emotional bandwidth, and received no intimacy in return, no deep conversations, no shared laughter, no moments of vulnerability, just tasks, responsibilities, and expectations. And in the quiet of their rooms, they wonder, do they love me or just what I do for them? And that question becomes a shadow, following them into every interaction, every holiday, every birthday. They smile, they serve, they show up, but inside, they feel invisible, and when they try to speak up, they are met with confusion. You're always here, we see you every day, but presence is not connection, and routine is not love. They remember the early years, when hugs were spontaneous, when laughter filled the house, when their children looked at them with wonder. Back then love was loud, messy, real. But as the children grew, the emotional language changed, gratitude became rare, affection became transactional, and the parent, once the center of their child's universe, became the background. They were still needed, but not cherished, still present, but not prioritized, and the loneliness deepened. They began to question themselves, did I give too much? Did I forget to teach them how to love me back? Did I make it too easy to ignore me? And these questions don't come with answers, only echoes of moments when they stayed up late to help with homework only to be met with silence the next day, echoes of birthdays they planned with care only to receive a rushed phone call on their own, echoes of sacrifices they made, vacations skipped, dreams postponed, health neglected, all for the sake of being available. And now, in the quiet of their later years, they sit with those echoes. Not bitter, not angry, just hollow. Watch their children thrive, careers, families, adventures, and they feel proud, but pride doesn't fill the void, pride doesn't replace connection, pride doesn't answer the question, do they see me? And so, they keep giving, hoping that maybe, just maybe, one more act of service will spark recognition, one more favor will lead to a heartfelt conversation, one more sacrifice will be the one that finally gets noticed, but it never does, because the pattern has been set. The parent gives, the child receives, and the emotional debt remains unpaid. This chapter is a mirror for every parent who has felt emotionally starved, who has given everything and still feels empty, and it's a reminder that love must be mutual, intentional, and felt, that being needed is not the same as being cherished, that being present is not the same as being valued, and that overgiving without emotional reciprocity leads to a kind of loneliness that words cannot describe. So today, pause, ask yourself, when was the last time someone asked about me? When was the last time I felt truly seen? When was the last time I received love without having to earn it? And if the answers hurt, speak your truth, demand emotional presence, demand to be felt, because you are not just a helper, not just a giver, you are a human being with a heart that needs warmth, not just work. And if your children don't understand that, teach them, not with anger, but with honesty, not with guilt, but with grace. Because the loneliness of overgiving is not your destiny, it's a warning. And you deserve more than silence, you deserve connection. There is a kind of regret that doesn't scream, it whispers, quietly, relentlessly, in the corners of a parent's mind as they sit alone in the later chapters of life, replaying choices made out of love but rooted in fear. For many parents who gave too much, this regret is not about what they did, it's about what they didn't do. The boundaries they didn't set, the dreams they didn't chase, the truths they didn't speak. They remember the moments they said yes, when their heart begged for no. The times they stayed silent to keep the peace, the years they postponed their own happiness to ensure someone else's comfort, and now, in the stillness of old age, those moments return not as memories but as wounds, wounds that never bled but always ached. They wonder what might have happened if they had taken that trip, pursued that passion, said what they really felt, or simply asked for love in return. They wonder if their children would have respected them more had they respected themselves sooner, if their relationships would have been deeper had they demanded emotional reciprocity, if their identity would have survived had they not buried it beneath duty. And the tragedy of this regret is its timing. It arrives when the body is tired, when the voice is softer, when the opportunities are fewer, and when the people they sacrificed for are too busy to notice the cost. They sit with photo albums that show smiling faces but hide the exhaustion behind those smiles, with diaries that were never filled because they never had time to write, with gifts they never opened because they were always giving, and they ask themselves, was it worth it? Not because they didn't love their children, but because they forgot to love themselves too. This chapter is a mirror for every parent who feels the weight of missed chances, of swallowed words, of dreams deferred, and it's a reminder that love without boundaries leads not to peace, but to quiet devastation. It's a call to speak now, to act now, to reclaim what remains, because regret is not just sadness, it's a warning, a signal that something was lost that mattered deeply, and while you cannot rewrite the past, you can still honor it by changing the present, by telling your story, by setting new boundaries, by showing your children that your life is not just a footnote in theirs, because if you don't, your silence will become your legacy, and your regret will be the only voice that remains. So today, forgive yourself for what you didn't know, for what you couldn't say, for what you were afraid to do, and begin again, not with bitterness, but with clarity, not with guilt, but with grace, because the regret that came too late doesn't have to stay forever. It can be the beginning of truth, of healing, and of finally choosing yourself. There is a kind of awakening that doesn't come with applause. It comes in silence, in solitude, in the quiet realization that you've spent decades giving, sacrificing, and surviving, but now you must begin living. For many parents who love too much, this chapter is not about regret, it's about rebirth, about reclaiming what's left, about choosing yourself without guilt, without apology, without delay. They've spent years being the backbone of their families, the emotional anchor, the silent strength, and now, in the later chapters of life, they realize that they are more than what they gave. They are what remains, what endures, what still dreams. This chapter is a call to rediscover passions buried under laundry piles, to revive friendships lost to busy schedules, to speak truths swallowed for the sake of peace, and to finally say, I matter, without flinching. It's about understanding that self-love is not rebellion. It's restoration, that boundaries are not walls. They are bridges to dignity, and that joy is not a luxury, it's a right. And while the world may not cheer for this transformation, the soul will. Because every time a parent chooses themselves, they rewrite the legacy of love, showing their children that care is not slavery, that devotion is not disappearance, and that aging is not fading, it's flowering. They begin to travel again, even if it's just to the park with a book they never finished. They begin to dress for themselves, not for duty. They begin to say no with grace, yes with clarity, and I need without shame, and in doing so, they teach their children the most powerful lesson of all, that love must include the self, that giving must include receiving, and that presence must include purpose. This chapter is not just a conclusion, it's a beginning, a declaration that the story doesn't end with sacrifice. It begins again with self-respect, with laughter, with boundaries, with truth, because the parent who reclaims what's left is not just surviving, they are finally living, and in that living, they become whole, not just remembered for what they gave, but celebrated for who they are.